Okay, there we go. So thanks everybody for coming. I know we'll have a few others probably trickling in. If you weren't here, if you just joined, again, we'd love to have you introduce yourself in the chat, your name, where you're coming from today. I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Jeremy Roschelle as our keynote speaker for this evening or this morning, depending on where you are. Dr. Roschelle is currently the Executive Director for Learning Science Research at Digital Promise, which is really leading innovative nonprofit organization that I think we'll hear more about today. Before joining Digital Promise, Dr. Roschelle spent a number of years as the Executive Director for the Center for Technology and Learning at SRI International. He also served as an associate editor for the Journal of Learning Sciences, and he leads the Center for Integrated Research in Computing and Learning Sciences, which is also known as CIRCLES. Again, highly encourage you to check that out if you're not familiar, and maybe Jeremy can type in the website in the chat if there's time. Dr. Roschelle has a really internationally recognized research program that has helped us really gain a better understanding of how technology can improve teaching and learning, as well as ways to make it more equitable, and has truly done amazing work with computer-supported collaborative learning. So if that wasn't enough, in addition to his research program, he's really played an influential role sort of beyond that to, I would say like really bring people together and support teams of researchers to really do some amazing education research. So I don't have time to, spell all of his amazing accomplishments, but I guarantee that we're going to learn something today, and I'm really looking forward to the talk. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Jeremy.
Well, thanks so much, Caitlin. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk to you about scaling AI, one of my favorite topics. I'm going to start by just saying a little bit about where I work, Digital Promise, because you may not have heard of it. And so Digital Promise is a US-based nonprofit organization, and our secret sauce is bringing people together. We bring together educators, researchers, and innovators. And so, for example, we're a partner in the NSF Engage AI Institute that presented yesterday. And we're the lead on SeerNet, which is something Danielle McNamara referred to in her keynote. And you'll notice that at points I build on some things in this talk that Danielle said, and also Kumar Garg said, and some of our other speakers. So I'm seeing this conference really nicely fit together, which is pretty exciting. Now, when we introduced Digital Promise, I really want to talk to you about our North Star goals, but I realize I'm being hemispherist because maybe they have to be Southern Cross goals too. So please excuse me that we call them North Star goals. And the middle one talks about 30 million students. That's what we mean by scale. There are 30 million historically and systematically excluded learners that we want to have sustained and meaningful experiences of powerful learning that put them on a path to post-secondary completion. Well, that's a big, audacious goal, but that's the kind of goals I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about AI and education really needs to take on problems of scale. And when we say powerful learning, we at Digital Promise have a definition for this. My colleague, Carly Chillman, who's in the chat, may put the link for this particular web page in the chat. So if you want to follow up, you can. But we see powerful learning as personal and accessible, authentic and challenging, collaborative and connected, and inquisitive and reflective. Now, why am I talking about scale? Well, I'm talking about scale because the challenges that we have to rise to face are large-scale challenges. And so this year, in the United States, National Assessment of Educational Progress reported the largest score declines in mathematics that we've ever seen. And it happened in both grades 4 and 8. And basically, the scores in 2022 were back to the level of scores we saw 20 years ago in 2003. So some people are saying like 20 years of gains have disappeared. Well, that's a really large scale challenge. We'd had this gradual growth in math. Now we're seeing a big decline. And the decline in math varies with poverty. So this is, by the way, in all the slides, I'm trying to include sources, and I'll send you the slides afterwards if you want them. So I'm not going to say where all the slides come from, but I document it in them, and I also any papers that I'm referring to. I'll have the citation in the slide. By the way, would love if you tweet, if you do that kind of thing. Actually, I'm not tweeting that much anymore, but I include the Twitter handles below. that would be lovely. Even better, I am doing LinkedIn a lot these days, and I'm easy to find there. So if you love, hate, want to talk more about the talk, would love to carry that on LinkedIn. All right, back to what I was saying. The decline in math we're seeing varies with poverty. With students who are in low poverty schools, that is affluent schools, not declining quite so much, but you see in the orange line at the bottom, high poverty schools, it's a much steeper decline in scores. And scale is a concept that is intrinsic to addressing equity. If we're not really thinking about scale, we're also not really taking on the problems we have with equity. And this was brought to home to me in a quote from colleagues Kim Gomez, Luis Gomez, and Marcelo Worsley, who said diversity, equity, and inclusion can only really be understood and achieved at scale. And they're asking us to look beyond small-scale examples of use and access for small groups of users to projects that touch the lives of many users from a variety of backgrounds and abilities and tools. Well, we're going to be talking about this throughout the talk today. Now, on the other side, when I look at AI, I think its promise is scalability. I see AI as something that can help us detect patterns, not just the trends, like the trends you saw in NAEP, but the infinite variety of smaller patterns that are really important that are happening out there. And so that gives us a grasp on scalability we don't have when we only have trend lines. And a promise is adaptability, that we can build on learners' strengths and address their needs by adapting to all those patterns at scale. And I'm also seeing when I read what's going on out there, that AI is going to be happening at scale in education. So here's one example I saw in the news recently. AI in the education market is expected to hit 80 billion by 2030. And that may well be an underestimate. Of course, when we talk about the promise, we have to talk some about the risks too. And so there are documents being produced and conversations being had everywhere across the globe, at our conference here, at UNESCO, at the European Union, in Australia. Everyone's talking about the ethics and the equity of AI and the problems we'll see. I do want to call attention to the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights that the White House produced recently, just about a month ago, which has 5 key principles. And I like it because it's only 5. And, you know, I'm getting on in age and I can keep track of 5 things. A document well worth reading as we think both about the opportunities, but the risks. Okay, so let's talk about, when we talk about empowering learners at scale, we are thinking in terms of at least 2 components then. We want to enable tens of millions of students to experience powerful learning, and we want to adjust the large-scale risks. Now, when we set ourselves this big a challenge, I think it helps to have a visual image of what the heck it is that we are trying to do. What would success really look like? So I'm going to ask you to find a piece of paper and a pen and to go along with me and think about this question I'm now going to pose. On one axis here, I've drawn the goal of sustained powerful learning for our students. And along the other axis, I've drawn for a large number of learners. So how would you depict where we are now and where we want our goal to be? Take a moment and draw something. Alex, you just wait a minute for you to do that. I know it's weird in a keynote to wait, but it's a better talk, we know from all that learning research, if your minds are active. So what would you draw? Okay, so I had my slide skip on me. There we go. Well, I hope you didn't draw something here where we have sustained powerful learning, but, you know, it's just for a few students. And frankly, you know, I've done educational research a long time, and I'm embarrassed to say I've been up there for a long time, where I've been able to produce lovely things and work in small settings and show they work, but not reach scale. And also, we have a lot going on here. We have very superficial uses of things that maybe shouldn't be called AI, but in the market, they are being called AI, but they're being used by a large number of learners, so they get attention. So one obvious thing is we want to be here. We want powerful learning for a large number of learners. Well, that was a layup question. Now here's a little harder one. When we do educational research, we always find that pre-test scores predict post-test scores. So it's a scatter plot behind this with lots of dots of each individual student, but you can draw a line through it. And the question is, if that's what happens if we do nothing, what do we want the line to look like when we're done? So think for a second and draw. What would you want the line to look like if you did really well? If we really hit it out of the ballpark, what would the new line look like? I'll give you a second again to think. Now, you may have thought of something like this, which I'd call raising all the boats, a tide that raises all the boats, because everyone's score went up. And certainly we do want everyone's score to go up. But if that's all we've done, we still have huge inequities in our society. And it's all based on what pre-score test score they had happen. So that's no good. So maybe you thought it would be something like this, which closes gaps. And the lower students with lower scores gain much more. The ones who already had high scores don't gain very much. That'd be a kind of pure mastery learning. But I'm going to argue that we don't actually want that either, because if we're deploying all this AI, we ought to be producing massive benefits for everyone. And when you actually try to put things into a school, if you're not producing any benefit for some class of learners, you're going to get pushback about that. So you need to be doing some good for everyone. So I'd argue we actually just want something like this, where everyone improves, but we want students who have low prior performance to improve more. And it's possible to do it. I know it's possible because I did research with the Heffernans and with assessments, and we showed exactly this kind of thing. With when assessments was used for online math homework, everyone improved their achievement, but the students with lower prior achievement improved more. Okay, one more image of our goal, your conventional bell curve. How do we want our bell curve to shift over time? I won't give you that much time to think about this one. Maybe you're thinking, hey, we want to shift to the right with more students getting higher quality learning outcomes. But actually, we have to narrow variability. We want more equality of those learning outcomes. So that's something we don't always measure. We often measure, are we shifting to the right? That's what our statistics measure. But do we measure, are we decreasing variability? Not so often. So when I think of scale, I want all these things. And what I want to argue in this talk is that actually these are nice startup pictures to get you thinking, but none of them is the right picture that we ought to be thinking about. And the reason is I've been showing you is a series of pictures which are all sort of one-dimensional. In the sense we have one variable, like a pretest score, that we're trying to predict another variable, like a post-test score. It's kind of very one-dimensional. I'm going to be arguing for a multi-dimensional view of AI. So I'm going to be looking at a long tail kind of distribution of outcomes and thinking about where are we with the dimensions of variability we're capturing in our AI models underlying the technologies and the numbers of students that those models are enabling to experience powerful learning. I think very early AI was mostly to the left, although they captured many features, the dimensions were pretty much just cognitive dimensions, so one kind of dimension. And it's tall to the left. There's a nice tall bar there, which makes it attractive. However, I studied calculus a lot. I have to warn you, when you do calculus, you think about the area under the curve. The area under the curve is how many students we're having a great outcome for in this chart. And as we incorporate more dimensions of variability, and we capture the students at B, and all the students at C, and all the students in between, we are scaling to many, many more students than if we just focus on that first tall bar at A. So we have to move from 1D to multiple dimensions. Now, if it's late at night or early in the morning for you, you can go home, because that was the main message of the talk. But I hope you stay, because I have a lot more to say about it. And what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about some of the things I've learned while studying scale and math learning technologies. I've had great opportunities to study some really great technologies and learn things. I'm going to make a case for what I really mean by a long tail focus in our field's work. And I'm also going to talk about the policy context and urge you to get involved, not just in the technical work, but in the policy work as well. And let's get started. So I'm going to go back a little bit, about 12, 14 years back, to a classic study I had the opportunity to do. It was the largest scale study I ever did. And it was scaling up an interactive technology that you see to the right that was using motion context with soccer players running across the field to teach middle school, 7th and 8th grade mathematics to students, particularly linear function and proportional reasoning. And you'll notice very cleverly, way back in 2008, we predicted the World Cup soccer outcome. You can see the Netherlands player in orange is ahead of the US player in blue. So is that awesome or what? We got the World Cup outcome all those years in advance. That's here, shown here. Anyway, SimCalc was not just a piece of software. We integrated a curricular workbook, a teacher guide, and you see in the picture, professional development for teachers. That's important to keep in mind. It wasn't just tech. We tested SimCalc. I'm very proud of this. We went to Texas, which is a very diverse state. I know George knows something about that. And we went to different regions of Texas, to the capital region, to the Dallas-Fort Worth region, which is a metropolis, to more rural regions, and also to the border region near Mexico. We did that on purpose because we wanted to see, would it work in all those places? And I'm just going to cut to the chase. In the first study, we had 100 teachers approximately, and we actually did 3 studies. And one of the most exciting things about this, Danielle talked about the replication crisis. Well, we got it to replicate. So we actually ran 3 different experiments, and we got the same results in each experiment, which is the treatment group, which is shown in the right of each graph. They showed a higher gain score, the post-test minus the pre-test, the gain, than the delayed treatment, than the control group, which is to the left in every case. We did it across 2 grade levels. We did 2 different ways in 7th grade. The year 1 experiment was a classic randomized assignment. And in the second year, we had some teachers who were in the control condition in the first year, and we compared their score in year 2 to their own score in year 1, which was the score of their students, but the same teacher. So that was a quasi-experiment. And we got it to replicate, and we particularly showed gains in the light blue on conceptual understanding, which was really rewarding to show. And I'm going to start to talk now about variability that we saw in these results. So this is the main effect, but that's just showing that that bell curve shifted to the right. And that's not what we want. So I want to talk to you about what I learned about variability. And so to do that, I'm going to start with this chart, which I'm going to ask you to think about and type into the chat what pattern you see. But let me tell you a little bit about the chart so that you can do it. In this chart, every bar is one teacher's classroom. And the height of the bar is the average learning gain of students in that classroom. So over here to the right, a tall green bar is a SimCalc or treatment classroom that got a very high score. This is a treatment classroom that got a low score, and so on and so forth. Gray is control. And so there's many patterns you can see in this. Take a moment and do me a favor and type into chat what you notice about variability as shown by this chart. And I'm going to see if I can, a flaw is I can't see chat while I'm doing this. I'm just going to let you go for a little bit. Think about the patterns you're seeing as you analyze this chart. There's no right answer. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the patterns that I've done this before. So I have a sense of the kind of patterns people notice. I'm going to talk about some of those. And maybe later in Q&A, we can talk about anything I missed that you had. Oops, and I didn't mean to go back. How did I go back? There we go. One thing you may notice is the green is all to the right. And that's our main effect. That's that on average, teachers who used SimCalc did better than students who didn't. And you may notice, though, that teachers varied a whole lot. There's some stellar teachers up here, but we also have 4 teachers who used the intervention, and they didn't have classrooms that did particularly well at all. There was something going on that could kind of squash the effect. You may also notice that there's some teachers who are gray bars, some of these, who did wonderfully, and they didn't have it. didn't need this technology to achieve the exact same outcome. What were they doing? Well, we'd love to know more. The lesson of the story is teacher variability, despite the positive effect. Teacher variability, that is variability in different classes, was huge. And so what did we learn about that? Well, we did a moderator analysis, which I'll go through super quickly, where we looked at gender, ethnicity, teacher-rated prior achievement. And basically, we found in all three studies, in every case, no matter what variable we looked at, students did better with SimCalc. That's all your tall black bars. But I'm going to zoom in now, and I'm going to zoom in on teacher rating of prior achievement, where we asked the teachers before they started this curricular unit, which students in your roster do you think will learn a lot, that is be high, medium, or low, not learn so much. And they gave us a roster beforehand. And there's a pattern I don't like when we zoom in on that, which is when teachers said a student's not going to learn that much, the student didn't learn that much. And the students for which the teacher had a high expectation learned the most. Well, that's not equitable. And so I wonder a lot, could AI help us? Could it help us notice this happening in real time? What kind of teacher moves could it help us uncover that might change this kind of pattern of results? Well, we learned a lot about dimensions of teacher variability, and I want to point out just how complicated it all is. There's an article cited here where we looked very carefully at how much math did teachers know. They had to know some math to do this well, but overall, teacher math knowledge was a poor predictor of how well their students did. Just was not a great predictor. On the other hand, we found some teacher instructional choices that may explain those 4 bars that were green but low, that were small gains. Teachers who skipped around a lot in the curriculum or didn't give students enough time to do the curriculum as intended could really depress results, we learned. We also learned some teacher discourse moves seem to really matter. For example, the curriculum asked students to explain what patterns they were seeing with the Netherlands beating the United States. And if a student gave an answer, and a teacher just gave them an acknowledgement like, that's great, wonderful, that didn't do so good. But when the teacher asked students to elaborate, the whole classroom, not just that one student, learned a lot more. We found how teachers regulate students' use of computers. If teachers were constantly telling the kids to turn the computers off, that wasn't good. And we've learned things about professional development. There were so many factors. And I just learned that the linear models that we had available to us were not great ways to capture those patterns. We could just scratch the surface. In fact, there were so many other dimensions. When we studied sustainability, we found that if SimCalc was aligned to a school district's local goals and strategies, these effects were more likely to be sustained than if they were misaligned. We also found how important that alignment was to state standards, because even though this research started in Texas, we then went to Florida. And actually, we went to England too, and we went to Hong Kong. We got very similar results in all 4 places. But we learned we had to change the English language that was used because they talk about mathematics differently in England and Hong Kong. There were these huge numbers of dimensions that we had to adapt by hand in order to maintain. It's a variable environment out there for teaching and learning. And in order to try to keep the same levels of effect by hand, our team had to accommodate a lot of different factors. And that was hard to do. I wonder, could AI help us adjust to all these different factors? So bottom line of this SimCalc portion is, yeah, we got some great results, but not as good as I wish we had. And it wasn't good for everyone. And when we started studying that, there were so many dimensions of variability. Some more things I've seen, but I'm going to speed up now. I'm just going to say I've done other RCTs. I did the one with assessments. I did one with reasoning mind. There's more factors in there. I've seen this pattern before where lots of things matter and it's hard to model them when all you've got is a linear regression model to work with. I want to switch to something that's more current today. Right now, I'm working on a study that will go out to 150 schools will be involved in this study. And in the warm-up of this study, we're trying to pick which products to study. And we found the EdSurge product index has 166 elementary math products that are out there serving students. And we reviewed over 100 of these that we thought were operating at scale based on the published information. And then we interviewed about a dozen of them in depth, because when they publish their information, they all say they're adaptive. But most of them give you almost nothing about what the actual algorithm is. So to find out what the algorithm was, we had to interview them. So I did this last year. It was very interesting. I learned that there's many products that, oh boy, I'm not sure I want to give them credit for being adaptive. They're really just doing some kind of pretest and then matching students to an activity once. And once the student is matched, it's not adaptive at all. I give those products a 0. There were a lot of products, what I would say are one-dimensional and mastery-oriented. They're capturing, for example, do students get 3 problems right in a row? And if students don't get 3 problems right in a row, they might shift them somewhere else in the learning progression. They might remediate. And if it's very high, they might speed the student up and go faster. That is the most common scale product in America right now. I have some confidence in math that it's a one-dimensional product is the most common product out there. And we did see and are very excited about, and we're going to be studying some products exploring a second dimension, which is really trying to take into account the teacher, not just the student, and what the teacher is trying to teach. And so this includes some adaptive information based on teacher goals and teacher objectives. So that's where we are today. We're at 1D and 2D. And yet these math products that we studied have so many other qualities that they are hand tuning. They're providing customizable UIs to schools, but of course the schools have to tune those by hand. They have a strong curricular progression and can remap the curricular progression based on your learning standards in your state or your district. They have support for student choice. They have accessibility options like turning on high contrast or enabling students to listen instead of reading. They have custom supports for English learners, on and on and on. But all these factors right now are being tweaked by hand, or they're asking the teacher to make the choice about how to adapt to their student by tweaking things on these factors. I want to ask, is there a way AI could help in this multi-dimensional space for us to enable students and teachers to make better choices? So, a summary of where we've been so far, and then we're going to move on. Most existing large-scale products in math, which is what I sampled, have low-dimensional algorithms, yet we know many dimensions of variability matter. And in research, we can get pretty frustrated trying to track those multiple dimensions when we just try to use linear regression models. It's hard to figure out the factors. They all sort of correlate, and it's hard to make sense of them. And my claim is AI is expanding our modeling capabilities and could have a huge payoff if it helps us as designers, as teachers, as students, as parents, to take in more dimensions of variability and to use them in our teaching and learning approach. So I want to step back for just a second to a basic and say, I've been talking about scale, but I haven't defined it. And I just want to say, I'm not talking about just a bigger N, a bigger number of students served. I'm talking about scale that encompasses the generalizability to the population we care about. For example, when I started out showing that we care about low-income schools and math learning there, are our results working for both high-income and low-income schools, especially? And so I want to recommend Cynthia Coburn's paper. If you've never read it, it's a great paper for thinking about scale beyond a bigger N. I agree with her definitions, just don't have time to go into that right now. This is what we've been talking about. Scale requires we have highly dimensional models. So what I want to shift to and argue a bit for now is, what are the dimensions? When I say highly dimensional, what am I talking about? I've hinted a little bit at it, but I want to try to come back to it and put it more in a theoretical frame for you. So highly dimensional, we're going to be diving in and unpacking highly dimensional. In the opening keynote, Danielle McNamara offered this wonderful slide, which does a great job of sharing some of what it means to be multidimensional. So I hope you went to her talk or that you'll listen to it on the recording. But I'm actually going to go in a slightly different direction, although it's many of the same factors. And the dimension I'm going to go is a theory of action model the very generalized theory of action that I developed with a colleague, Rob Fichet, some number of years ago. And I'm really going to zoom in on this area here where I means instructor or teacher, L means learner, and R means a curricular or a technology resource, and the interactions among these things. So I'm going to conceptualize what I mean by dimensions, just using this for a second. So when we talk about students, let's just start with the I, L, the learner, excuse me. The characteristics of each student, how the students interact with each other socially, how the students interact with the resources, that is this interaction from L to R, this one here, also how they interact with each other. Well, I actually think AI and Ed has made a lot of progress on these sort of things. Like, for example, AI that supports social learning and supports modeling how students interact with resources. I think that's our strong point. I would critique AI and Ed for sometimes being too deficit focused and not having a good model of what student assets are. What are students' strengths? How can we leverage what students are good at, not just remediate what they're not doing so well at? And there's many other factors that aren't always brought in, metacognitive factors like self-regulation, neurodiversity factors, for example, related to disabilities or abilities you may have because your brain works differently. Also, AI that would help us think school-wide, not just what you're doing in math, but how does that relate to what you're good at in science and in other subjects, literature, social studies, and also life-wide. How does what you're doing in class relate to what you're doing at home and in all the other places? So there's a lot of student dimensions to take into account. We're not necessarily doing them all well. By the way, as we go, maybe take some jots to jot down some notes. If you could just pick a handful of dimensions, like you're picking, for example, what do you call it when you pick a sports team to beat the Netherlands in a simulated match? Who would be your 11 players? Well, what 11 variables would you pick? If you could pick 11 that you think would give you the strongest purchase in your learning environment, what 11 dimensions of variation would you go for? So we started with students. I also want to point out that we're not aiming for a singular student outcome necessarily. So we've been focused up here in content knowledge, but schools today are doing this exercise called Portrait of a Graduate, and they're realizing that multiple outcomes matter to them. And so powerful learning isn't one number on a test. It's also not just your math knowledge, it's how well you can communicate, express your creativity, engage in critical thinking, collaborate, the strengths of character you show. Oops, didn't think of that. Good job. So check out Portrait of a Graduate. And when I talk about dimensions of variability, I'm also talking about the kinds of actions we can take. We know from classic research by Vincent and Levin that you can adapt at the step level as students do a problem step by step, at the task level, giving students whole different activities to do. And you can also adapt in your design. But there are also adaptivity loops that are less discussed, like adaptation across settings, or adaptivity that pulls the student together with their teacher or with their parent. Of course, we have to conceptualize teachers too, and I talked about that a lot already when I was showing the SimCalc work. By the way, here I have the site for Cohen, Round, and Bush and Ball, which are the originators of this theoretical image. My call to action here is if we really want to understand how teachers matter, let's get the teachers involved, seriously involved in our design of AI technologies. And dimensions go beyond this triangle in the middle because they have the words in an environment. Well, what's an environment mean? Well, it means an implementation environment for one thing. How do we support teachers during teacher professional development? How do we engage their parents? How do school characteristics, whole school characteristics, matter when students are learning a particular thing in class? What about school leadership? How do we take that into account in our models? These factors all have tremendous influence. Like school leadership, I have learned, plays such an influence on sustaining powerful learning across a student's life for multiple grades. But it's rare to have an AI model that can give us ideas about where school leadership needs to be adjusted to get better results for the students. I think of my colleague Alex Bowers. It's one of the few really doing work in that area, but we need more people working at this implementation level. And there's a systems level of the assessments, the curricular frameworks, the strategies, tools, and programs. These all matters tremendously to whether something works or doesn't work. In fact, SimCalc wasn't sustained that well in the Rio Grande Valley. And the reason was that 2 years after we were there, they won an enormous grant, which was just a gear giveaway. It was a grant called Gear Up. And the Gear Up strategy was almost like content free. And it was so much money, it grabbed everyone's attention, and it just completely squashed the wonderful results we had had. No one would pay attention to us anymore because they were getting so much money from Gear Up. Sad story, but the reality of dealing with equity and scale is we have to take in system level variables into our thinking. So that's what I mean when I talk about the space being highly dimensional. And I think the space to the left is pretty easy stuff, relatively speaking. We could teach humans to notice where students are struggling and how to speed things up and how to slow things down. And if there's only one or two variables to pay attention to, we could probably teach people how to do that. But when we get into this multivariate space and try to account for all the things that really matter in scaling an approach to learning, we really need the help of computation. And that's where I'm going to argue AI needs to go, because that's where it's going to have the most value. So building on something that Chris Dede was talking about, intelligence augmentation, he's Keynote, I'm going to say that we're in the midst of a trend in AI and ed. That classic AI and ed way back when just took into account a few dimensions of data. For example, log data or student accuracy while solving problems. And the zone where we can give the most help to this educational system, the zone of intelligence augmentation, is when AI shifts to the right and starts to take into account many, many variables. And so think about, if you could pick your team of variables, which ones do you wish you had to bring along? And I say that because I want to acknowledge a problem here, that our AI can only be as smart as the data sets and the variability within them. And it's hard to get multidimensional data sets. It's hard to get data that's out here. So what are we doing to get the data we would need to build AI models that capture that variability and serve more students? Well, I think we have to work together to build those data sets. We can't wait for them to come to us. We can't be lazy AI and ed people just picking whatever data set we can find on the shelf. We have to go out and find those data sets. That was really a big theme of Danielle's talk. It was a big theme of Kumar's talk today. So I'm seeing some consensus we've got to do that. Danielle is doing fantastic work. The Arizona State University program has an amazing data set with many of the properties that I've been talking about, and they're working to open that up so we can all benefit from it. So kudos to Danielle for just taking on this enormously hard and important problem. And I would invite you to join us at CERNet, a project we're running. Requests for proposals from our U.S. Department of Education are open now for those who are qualified to apply. And you can get some money to get involved with using other people's data sets to build smart models. And we'd love to have you join that. So you can go to CERNet.org and you can read a whole lot more about that. Okay, so as Spider-Man says, though, we're moving to having great power. And with that comes great responsibility. And so I just want to close by saying a few things, asking you to get involved in some of the policy discussions. And here's one reason to do it. Lots of people have studied, why does educational reform start to work and starts to grow steam and then it just disappears? That could be educational improvement, if you like the word improvement better than reform. And what Cohen and Mehta found in a paper very much worth reading is that there's a remarkable, I love this quote, a remarkable vulnerability to public opinion and political pressure. That as we try to do something new in education and it starts to scale, well, at first no one cares and we can fly underneath the radar and we can do great things. But when it gets big enough, the antibodies start to come out and they start to attack this new appearance of improvement in their space. and political opinion appears, political pressure occurs, and the reform or the improvement often collapses. And I'm really worried that could happen with the good things we could be doing with AI, that there is going to be negative public opinion. There already is, and political pressure around AI. And we've got to rise up to that. We can't pretend that we're going to have a smooth ride. And so I've been involved in the EdSafe AI Alliance. That's one way to get involved, but you can get involved in so many ways. There's things going on in every country, every region. UNESCO is organizing a conference right now at the same time as our conference. So lots of ways to get involved in this problem. It's a hot area, lots going on. I'm working with the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Educational Technology, on an insights and recommendations report about AI in January 2023. Just giving a plug for a book I'm reading right now and learning more about ethics by reading it. And so please join us in this hot area and don't just do your technical work, get involved in the policy discourse. So my closing call for action is if we want AI models that really empower learners, we have to expand from 1D to multidimensional factors, multidimensional actions, multidimensional outcomes. We have to shift our work to the long tail. We have to build partnerships around big data sets. And at the same time, we have to do the policy work. We have to expand our understanding of what's going to happen when this gets big in society. We have to apply high standards for ethics and equity to ourselves. Most of all, we just have to get involved. So thank you. Pleased to end there and take some questions. I want to thank all my colleagues in Digital Promise, in Circles, in Engage AI, SteerNet, for their contributions to my thinking. And I really invite you to continue the conversation on whatever social media platform you like best, because I'd love to hear from you and talk more. And maybe I'll turn the slides off now, and finally, we can take some questions and interaction. So back to you, Caitlin, to moderate.
Thank you, Jeremy, for an excellent talk. I'm just going to start, if you don't mind, with one of the questions that came up earlier on in your talk when you were talking about, introducing the idea that AI could help in, I don't see the name, it's Matchmaker Education Labs was who asked the question, and feel free to elaborate in the chat if you want, but the idea was fidelity of implementation is a huge issue. Yep. Can AI help address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to do there. In the assessment study, we had a manual adaptivity loop, which is we were paying close attention to log data as teachers were starting to use the software and looking for indicators that were contrary to our expectations, and then going to talk to those teachers to find out what was keeping them from using it in the ways that were intended. And we learned that that study, the assessment study, had a whole first year of adaptive teacher preparation, where we gave everyone the same thing at first, but then we worked with specific teachers and specific groups. So I think we know a ton in this field. And I think a lot of the work may not be only in the better thing for student learning, but really trying to understand implementation variability and how we can adapt to squeeze out some of that variability while respecting different needs and strengths. Let's go for another one.
Awesome. This one's from Krista Morrison, who asked, how do we measure prior knowledge / learning? Like in adult learning theory, younger students would like to be recognized for their prior knowledge in learning. In higher ed, this is the most common request from students. Please respect my knowledge in prior learning. So the question, I guess, kind of boils down to how do we make sure we don't teach or expect them to learn?
Yeah. Well, the worst thing to do is what conventional studies like the one I showed do, which is we measure their prior learning on a test and we give them a number and we say you have low prior knowledge and you have high. What we know, for example, from learning theory is the ways students express their understanding aren't often immediately the ways that are measured on a test. Students may gesture before they can verbalize their ideas. Well, we have vision recognition technologies that can recognize some of those gestures. Could that help us understand? We also have students who do remarkable things, perhaps in their science class, and the math teacher has no idea what that student is capable of. Or do remarkable things in a hobby or at home. So how can we incorporate prior learning that's broader than the content score? I think is really huge. I think it's one of those intelligence augmentation things. I believe teachers would use the information if it was well organized and available, but it's too much work for the humans in the system to assemble a learner profile that informs them of all the strengths that learners are bringing. And so I would love to see work that's co-designed with teachers about helping teachers have a multidimensional model of what prior knowledge is and what student assets are.
Thank you. I'm gonna, I guess, ask you if, when you ask the group to come up with what we think the most important variables would be.
Yeah.
I guess I'm really curious what you think. If you had to pick your top sort of handful of them, what you think those would be from your experience.
Oh, well, let's see. I don't know. Did we really do it in chat? Did people have a chance to type what they think? 'Cause I would like to crowdsource it a bit let's try it first and then I'll offer some commentary. So
Okay.
why doesn't just type the top 1, 2, or 3? I'll do it too. Here's what we do often in our circles team is everyone prepares an idea in chat, but they don't press return. And then we'll all press return at the same time. And it's just really fun to see everything pop up all at
I like
once.
that.
So let's all do that together. And we're all going to type 3 variables that we wish got more attention in our research. So I'm going to come up with 3. Okay, I got my 3 ready. Took me a second. I'm not sure, I'm 100% sure, but it's just an exercise. So we'll give one more minute and see what people joining us come up with as their favorite variables that they think we ought to do more with. Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Return. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, really interesting. So we're seeing some things about home and community. And so I think that's just so right. When I've visited a lot of schools since the pandemic and during the pandemic, and every time I visit, one of the things I see is taking into account trauma and what students are experiencing at home is just top of mind for every educator. And it's top of mind because it has to be. So I think variables that help us get outside the school setting entirely and give us some sense of that are super important. So that's one thing I see. I love Jim Larimore has sense of belonging. I think I think sense of belonging is a really cool variable because I would really like to find ways AI can help students who don't feel they belong to find their place in our education system. And that's what I mean by multiple outcomes too. Maybe they're very different places, but deep in my heart, I want every kid to find their place where they feel good as a learner, where they feel identity as a learner. So I think belonging variables, just tremendous. Family engagement I'm seeing there from my colleague Carly, who I know is on the PTA for school district. So she is an engaged parent. Thank you for your contributions, Carly. Yeah, I said student discourse variables because I think we have a lot of ability to capture talk. And I think talk is tremendously revealing about the quality of a learning environment. And so I've been fascinated with the AI tools that are just using a single microphone in a classroom to do whatever they can to capture talk and start to model patterns of talk in classrooms. And it can be simple as the teacher dominates all the time. And how can we disrupt that pattern? But it can be more subtle, where I'm seeing people do work on Zoom where you have individual microphones and you actually have roster information about students' identity. And you can actually look at the real-time production of inequity in who gets to talk and how long they get to talk. And so I think discourse is a great one. I love that people are putting metacognitive things like self-regulation, help seeking, reflection, because we're living at a time, this is Chris Didi's keynote, where learning to learn is paramount. And so how are we tracking indicators of whether kids are learning to learn? Seem great. Caitlin or Lorraine, you want to talk about that you see in this list?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the same. It seems a lot of student affect with belonging, confidence, self-regulated learning. So it seems like a lot of these variables that people are picking up on are ones that may not be readily observable from some of the like more traditional outcome measures.
Yeah. I've been in touch with some really cool work. Multiple people are doing this kind of work where you have peers helping peers in an educational setting. Can be higher ed, it can be K-12, can be anything. And one thing the AI is doing is helping train students to be good help seekers and good help givers, because there's an art to giving good help. And I think that just like that hits our profile of a graduate things about communication and about teamwork and about character. But also it's stuff that nobody has time to do right now. We don't have time to coach kids on, when we teachers do, of course they do. But we could do so much more with coaching kids to be great collaborators, great help askers, great help givers. And so what would a school be like if we had subtle agents that are nurturing and nudging great collaboration skills? Would they be better schools? Would those be environments we all want to send our school kids? I think they might be.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in those kind of things.
Yeah, I love that. I think maybe we have time for one more, and I'm just gonna one of the things that I thought was really great is that you highlighted the fact that AI and education would be very well served to start focusing on student assets rather than the deficits. And I think that's one thing that I think people are maybe, many people would agree with you, but in practice, I think sometimes it's hard to shift that paradigm away, for a particular field. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about, or like, I don't know if I would say guidelines or thoughts, but things that you would see in terms of patterns or trends that you think you would like to see people sort of turn to in terms of that focusing on student assets in the context of education.
Well, number one, I would like them to turn to their colleagues of color who, our field of AI is disproportionately white. And the first place to turn is turn to your colleagues at your university or elsewhere and really listen to them about what would help. I mean, I think there's a lot of learning we can all do by just building more inclusive teams, building better partnerships. And once you start having those conversations, you're going to uncover a lot, because there's a lot of strength there, a lot of real power. But you have to learn to recognize it and work with it. And so I don't have a recipe other than to say, build inclusive teams to do this work is a really important place to start.
Thank you. I guess we're about out of time here. I just wanted to take the last minute and really say thank you for your time. This is an amazing talk and a lot to think about and learn from, and hopefully will inform a lot of the work that all of us listening are going to do moving forward.
My pleasure. Glad to be here. I wish we were in a physical auditorium so I could now look at all of you and talk to you in the hall, but let's do our best to stay connected. And so you know how to find me on social media, and I would love to hear from you.
For sure. And according to George, we'll be in person next year. So fingers crossed.
Thanks, Caitlin.